You wake up before sunrise because the heat inside your home makes sleeping past dawn impossible. Breakfast is whatever's left from yesterday, if there's anything left at all. You'll work today, probably 12 hours of it, and by tonight, you'll have earned less than the price of a coffee back in a country you'll likely never see. In many low-income nations across sub-Saharan Africa, the bottom 10% of the population earns somewhere between 50 cents and $1.50 a day, not an hour, a day. Now, on the other hand, somewhere else on the planet, someone wakes up in a house with more bathrooms than people, checks a portfolio that gained more before breakfast than that first person will earn in several lifetimes, and goes back to sleep because there's genuinely nothing urgent enough to get up for. Same species, same planet, same morning, completely different universe. This is the story of every level of wealth on Earth, from the absolute bottom to the very top, told through actual numbers, not vague impressions of rich and poor. Because most people have a rough sense of where they personally land, but almost nobody has an accurate picture of the entire ladder. And once you see the whole thing laid out, some of the rungs are going to surprise you. Let's start at the bottom, because the bottom is worse than most people imagine. The World Bank's current line for extreme poverty sits at $3 a day, adjusted for what that money can actually buy in a given country. Below that line, you're not choosing between wants, you're choosing between needs, and often you can't afford all of them. Roughly 1 in 10 people on Earth currently live below this line, and the concentration is brutal. Sub-Saharan Africa and conflict-affected regions account for the overwhelming majority of the world's extreme poor, which is exactly where that 50 cents to $1.50 figure from the opening comes from. That's not the poverty line. That's below it. That's the floor, beneath the floor. Climb one rung, and you reach what the World Bank calls the lower middle income poverty line, currently $4.20 a day. This is meant to reflect what counts as poverty in countries like India, Nigeria, or the Philippines, places where the cost of survival is higher than in the world's poorest nations, but still far below what anyone in a wealthy country would recognize as livable. At this level, food security is stable most months, but a medical emergency, a bad harvest, or a lost job can knock a household straight back down. One more rung up is the upper middle income poverty line, $8.30 a day, the standard used for countries like Brazil, South Africa, or Mexico. Above this line, but still fragile, the World Bank tracks something it calls the economically vulnerable, people earning up to about $14 a day. They're not counted as poor. They also don't have savings, insurance, or any real buffer, which means one bad month can undo years of progress. This is arguably the largest group on the entire planet, and it's the group least discussed because vulnerable but not technically poor doesn't make for a dramatic headline. Somewhere around $53 a day, roughly $19,000 a year, you cross into the top 10% of humanity by income. Sit with that for a second. An amount that barely covers rent in most Western cities puts you in the top 10th of the entire species, globally. This is the single most important number in this whole video because it reframes almost every conversation about wealth that happens in rich countries. Someone earning what feels like an unremarkable, entirely average salary in the United States or Western Europe is, by global standards, extraordinarily privileged. Not rich by local comparison, rich by human comparison. Keep climbing, and the story stops being about income and starts being about assets. Property, investments, businesses, things that generate money without you personally working every hour for it. This is where wealthy actually begins, and it's a completely different mechanism than a high salary. A surgeon earning several $100,000 a year can still be technically asset poor if none of that money is converted into ownership. Wealth isn't what you earn. It's what you keep and multiply. At the very top sits a group so small it barely registers as a percentage, and so wealthy that ordinary math starts to break. The world's richest 1% currently hold roughly 43% of all global financial assets. Read that again. Under 1% of humanity controls close to half of the money in the entire system. And within that 1%, there's an even smaller, even stranger tier, the billionaires. As of the most recent count, roughly 3,000 people on Earth hold billionaire status with combined wealth of around $18.3 trillion. 12 individuals within that group control more combined wealth than the poorest half of humanity, roughly 4 billion people put together. That comparison isn't rhetorical exaggeration. It's the literal documented math. 12 people versus 4 billion people, and the 12 come out ahead. And the gap isn't closing. Billionaire wealth grew by roughly 16% in a single recent year, nearly triple the average pace of growth over the previous 5 years combined. At that rate of acceleration, some economists tracking the trend have started forecasting the world's first trillionaire within a decade. One person? Controlling personal wealth in the trillions, while the World Bank's own projections suggest extreme poverty at current rates of progress, won't be fully eradicated for roughly another 2 centuries. Those two timelines exist on the same planet, running at the same time, and almost nobody experiences both of them simultaneously enough to notice the contrast. Every rung on this ladder we just climbed represents an actual measurable jump in what a day of existence looks like. At the bottom, survival itself is the daily project. In the middle, survival is secure, but stability isn't. Near the top of income, comfort becomes assumed rather than fought for. And at the very peak, money stops functioning like money at all and starts functioning like gravity. It just pulls more of itself toward the center, mostly on its own, whether or not the person at the center does anything differently that day. What's genuinely strange about all of this isn't that inequality exists. Every society in recorded history has had some version of a wealth ladder. What's strange is the scale of the modern gap and how invisible most of it is to the people living inside it. Someone in the global top 10% rarely feels rich because they're comparing themselves to their own neighbors, not to a subsistence farmer 4,000 miles away. Someone in extreme poverty rarely sees the billionaire tier as real in any concrete sense, because it might as well be happening on a different planet. The ladder is continuous. The experience of it is not. So where do you actually land on this? Most people watching this, statistically, are somewhere in that global top 10 to 20% without realizing it, simply by virtue of where they were born and what currency they earn in. That's not a guilt trip. It's just the math. The floor is 50 cents a day for some people alive right now, and the ceiling is measured in trillions. And almost everyone watching this sits somewhere in the enormous, quiet middle distance between the two, closer to the top than they think. Where do you think you land on this ladder? And does it match where you actually thought you'd be? Let me know in the comments. Until then, see you soon.